You're nothing but an overpaid babysitter for test tubes. The words echoed down the tiled corridor like a slap. My supervisor's voice, sharp, smug, and utterly dismissive, hung in the air as I stood frozen outside the pathology wing. I gripped my clipboard tighter. "Excuse me," I asked, though. I'd heard her clearly. Darla Jensen didn't flinch. "You heard me, Eva." Her red lipstick curled into a sneer. "You sign forms and checkboxes. Any entry-level tech could do that. My name is Eva Garland, and at 62 years old, I'd spent the last 19 years of my life running the diagnostic laboratory at Silver Rock Medical Center in Spokane, Washington. I'd earned my way up from night shift tech to certified laboratory director, overseeing every compliance check, every test batch, every annual audit. And Darla, who'd landed her shiny operations manager badge just 6 months ago thanks to a fast-track corporate mentorship program, had no idea what she was walking into. "Darla," I said calmly, "you might want to reread the clinical laboratory improvement amendments. This facility legally cannot operate without a certified lab director with my specific board credentials." She waved her hand dismissively, already scrolling her phone. "I've looked into it. There are like thousands of you. That's not how this works." I felt the familiar tightness form in my chest, not fear, but fury wrapped in professionalism. "Our laboratory license is tied directly to my certification. If I'm removed, it's revoked. Immediately." Darla rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. Dr. Lucero will be back from Boston next week, and she'll be thrilled with the money I've saved us." I stared at her, that smug, clueless confidence that only comes with inexperience. She genuinely believed slashing my $115,000 in salary was good business. She genuinely didn't understand that without me, no blood work, urinalysis, or diagnostic testing could legally continue. She was replacing compliance with chaos, and worst of all, she was proud of it. "Face it, Eva," she said, crossing her arms at the doorway. "Your little reign over this lab is over." Her words didn't scare me, but the danger she posed to patient safety did. As I walked past the centrifuges and analyzers, humming behind glass, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. This wasn't just about budget cuts or corporate posturing anymore. Darla wasn't bluffing. She was planning to go through with it, and she had no idea what was coming next. The way Darla kept second-guessing my decisions and chipping away at my authority with the staff told me this confrontation was just the start of something worse. What she didn't know or care to learn was how deep my relationship with Silver Rock Medical Center truly ran. When I first stepped into this lab, nearly 19 years ago, the place was on the brink of losing its certification. Equipment was outdated, documentation was a mess, and they'd gone through 3 interim directors in under a year. Federal inspectors had flagged us for non-compliance on everything from quality control protocols to technician training records. It was Dr. Nolan Shepard, the founder and CEO, who personally recruited me from Jefferson Valley Hospital downstate. I had turned their floundering diagnostics department into a benchmark operation in under 2 years. And Nolan had taken notice. "Eva," he'd said during our first meeting, "we serve people who've been ignored by every major hospital chain in this state. They need reliability, speed, and compassion. Can you help us build a lab that delivers all 3 that mission had pulled me in?" At the time, I was 8 years into watching the soul get stripped from healthcare by spreadsheets and quarterly targets. Silver Rock felt different. Within 6 months, we passed our next inspection with 0 deficiencies. By the end of year 1, we'd expanded to include a full molecular diagnostics suite, and revenue had jumped 43%. But none of that mattered to Darla. She had been hired during Nolan's sabbatical, a temporary leave after a surgery complication, and the board, nervous about rising costs, brought her in to optimize operations. Darla viewed healthcare as a series of inputs and outputs. She treated diagnostic work like inventory control. "Doctors get sentimental," she told me one afternoon, sipping cold brew from a mason jar like she was still on campus. "But in real business, you trim what's bloated." She didn't just misunderstand my role, she disregarded it entirely. My credentials weren't ornamental. They were legal requirements. The clinical laboratory improvement amendments weren't vague suggestions. They were federally enforced mandates that tied laboratory operations to directors with specific board certifications. I'd explained that more than once. I even printed the exact licensing clause and highlighted the automatic revocation policy tied to my termination. But Darla didn't listen. She didn't want to, because it was never about understanding the lab. It was about getting rid of me, the one piece of fat standing between her and a budget bonus. And her ignorance was about to cost the clinic everything. From diabetes management to cancer detection, our lab handled diagnostics that directly influenced life-saving decisions. The thought of that being disrupted over a spreadsheet made my stomach turn. That afternoon, as I reviewed the day's quality control reports and signed off on the final batch of test validations, I couldn't help but wonder, what if Darla actually followed through on her threats? The patients who relied on our results, the physicians who trusted our accuracy, the standard of care we'd spent nearly 2 decades building, all of it could vanish because Darla couldn't see past her cost-cutting bonus targets. The breaking point came on a crisp Tuesday morning in mid-November, just 4 days before Dr. Nolan Shepard was due to return from a global diagnostics summit in Chicago. I walked into my office to find Darla already there, seated behind my desk like she owned the place. A manila folder lay open in front of her, and she looked positively gleeful. "Good morning, Ava," she said in that falsely sweet tone I'd come to dread. "Hope you had a restful weekend because it's going to be your last as a Silver Rock employee." The air left my lungs. "I'm sorry," she pushed the folder toward me, her manicured nail tapping the first page. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics, and frankly, they don't justify your inflated salary. The board approved my plan to restructure lab operations, and that structure no longer includes your role." I stared at the page, the bold header screaming termination. "Effective immediately." My hands trembled. "Darla, this isn't just a job title. My certifications are federally tied to our license. If I leave, the lab loses its authority to operate." "I've spoken with HR," she said with a shrug, "and they agree it's the right decision. Security will escort you out after you collect your things." The crushing realization hit me like a freight train. She was serious. After all the warnings, she'd actually pulled the trigger, thinking the lab would carry on without interruption. If you want to see what happens when quiet strength turns into unstoppable momentum, hit that subscribe button and join me for the next chapter. "You don't understand," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "Our CLIA license is tied to my credentialing. Terminating me triggers an automatic compliance violation." Darla's smug smile flickered. "That sounds like scare tactics, Eva. Any senior tech can sign paperwork until we find someone cheaper." "This isn't about paperwork," I said, pulling up the CMS database on my desktop. "Here. This number is tied directly to my national board certification. Once it's flagged as inactive, we're non-compliant. Effective immediately." She leaned in, narrowing her eyes at the screen. And for the first time, I saw doubt. "That's just bureaucratic nonsense," Darla scoffed. "We'll call them and explain the situation." "There's no explaining," I said, my voice firmer now as the weight of what she'd done finally settled in. Federal law doesn't bend for budget cuts or staff turnover. Without a certified director, we cannot legally run any part of the diagnostic lab. No blood tests, no urine panels, no genetic markers. Nothing. For a flicker of a moment, I saw her falter. But pride is a stubborn thing. Darla crossed her arms and shook her head. "You're being dramatic, Eva. The lab will keep running just fine without you." Security appeared in the doorway behind her, 2 men in navy polos, who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. One of them gave me an apologetic nod. I gathered my coat and glanced back at the lab one last time. The analyzers hummed softly. Lights blinked from refrigerated centrifuges. Technicians I'd trained were mid-process on critical tests. Thousands of patient samples flowed through this lab each week, and now they had nowhere to go. It wasn't just data and numbers. It was patient care. And Darla had just severed the lifeline. The most painful part was knowing Dr. Shepard would come back to find the lab in ruins, brought down by someone who had no clue what she was managing. I stepped into the parking lot as my phone began buzzing. 1 alert, then 2, then 10. The federal systems were already updating. My employment termination had triggered automatic notifications to the credentialing agency, which in turn flagged Silver Rock's license as non-compliant. I sat behind the wheel of my car, staring at the lab through the windshield. Inside, Darla was probably putting on a brave face, telling the team everything was under control. But in just a few hours, she'd learned that no amount of confidence could rewrite federal law. My phone rang again. Caller ID lit up Dr. Thomas Hale, CEO of Everwind Diagnostics, our biggest regional competitor. I answered. Eva, I just received a compliance alert. You're no longer listed at Silver Rock. What happened? Thomas and I had worked together on complex genetic panels for years. We were competitors on paper, but shared a fierce commitment to diagnostic integrity. Darla Jensen terminated me this morning, I said flatly. She believes any tech can take over. There was a long, stunned pause. Eva, this is catastrophic for them. She just shut down their entire lab. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell her, I said, watching technicians gathering at the windows, confusion spreading as their systems began flashing error messages. She thinks it's all just paperwork, and that mistake was already spiraling into disaster. Thomas's next words stopped me cold. Eva, I've been looking for the right time to expand our lab operations. Honestly, I've always thought Silver Rock was wasting your potential. What would you say to joining Everwind Diagnostics as our Director of Laboratory Operations, Equity, Participation, Full Autonomy, and a significant salary bump? I blinked. Thomas, I appreciate the offer, but I was just terminated this morning. Is this really the time? This is exactly the time, he said, voice firm. Silver Rock is about to lose every referring physician in a 10-mile radius once word gets out that they can't process even a basic test. Those patients will need somewhere to go, and I want Everwind to be ready. Under your leadership, we can become Spokane's gold standard in diagnostics. As he spoke, I glanced back at the building. Through the glass doors, I saw Darla reappear, no longer smug, but visibly shaken. She clutched her phone to her ear like a lifeline, likely fielding the first wave of compliance calls and internal panic. The timing is poetic. I admitted, feeling something flicker back to life inside me. Hope, maybe laced with a healthy dose of justice. What kind of timeline are we talking? I can have paperwork on your desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thomas replied. Our board approved expansion funding last week. If we absorb Silver Rock's patient base and announce your leadership, we'll gain 2 years of growth overnight. The symmetry was perfect. Darla had cut my position thinking she was saving money. Instead, she was handing over every relationship I had built and her entire patient base to a direct competitor. The financial consequences alone would be devastating, but the reputational damage, irreversible. I'm very interested, I told him, watching more lab staff gather outside, confusion written across their faces. When can we meet? This afternoon, Thomas said without hesitation. I think your former employer is going to have a very rough day, and I'd rather be ahead of the wave when their clients start looking for help. As I pulled away from Silver Rock for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. Darla had seen me as expendable and overpaid line item, but her ignorance was about to become the most expensive mistake of her career. By 2 p.m., I was seated in Thomas's executive conference room reviewing the preliminary offer when his assistant knocked. Sorry to interrupt, she said, breathless. We're getting calls from multiple clinics requesting emergency lab support. Silver Rock just suspended all diagnostic testing indefinitely. Thomas and I exchanged a knowing look. The ripple effect was already faster than either of us had expected. Clearly, the regulatory agencies hadn't wasted a second alerting healthcare providers about Silver Rock's non-compliant status. How many calls so far? Thomas asked his assistant. 17 in the last hour, she replied, and several of them are specifically asking for Dr. Garland by name. My heart squeezed. It was bittersweet validation. These weren't just numbers on a screen. They were physicians who had trusted my lab for years, who had come to rely on the accuracy and integrity of our results to care for real people. And now, they were scrambling, because Darla had written off my role as some overpaid redundancy. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dr. Sarah Chen. Eva, I heard about Silver Rock's lab shutdown. Can you recommend another facility? My diabetic patients are mid-treatment and need their results. ASAP. Then, 1. From Dr. Michael Nguyen. What's going on? All our morning labs are getting bounced back from the system. And a third from Dr. Rebecca Lynn Eva. Please say this is temporary. I have 2 cancer patients waiting on urgent staging results. Every message reminded me that this wasn't just about regulations or egos. It was about people patients caught in the crossfire of Darla's arrogance. Thomas, I said, setting my phone on the table, I need to accept your offer. Those patients can't afford to wait for Silver Rock to clean up its mess. I was hoping you'd say that. He replied with a smile, sliding the offer packet toward me. With your reputation and connections, we can have those physicians transferring orders to Everwind by tomorrow. I signed the contract accepting the role of Director of Laboratory Operations, complete with a 30% salary increase and equity in the expansion project. Just as I set the pen down, my phone lit up with an incoming call, Dr. Nolan Shepard. He was still in Chicago, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. Eva, please tell me this isn't true. I just got off the phone with our attorney. We've lost our federal lab certification. It's true, I replied gently. Darla terminated me this morning. I warned her multiple times about the legal consequences, but she believed I was exaggerating. There was a long, pained pause. Oh God, Nolan whispered. Where is she now? I don't know. But if she's not on the phone with the Department of Health already, she's about to be. We need to fix this, Ava, he said quickly. Tell me what it takes. Name your price. But it was already too late. The desperation in Nolan's voice was painful to hear, but it didn't change the facts. Dr. Shepard, I said gently, I've already accepted the position at Everwind Diagnostics. Even if I wanted to come back, reinstating our certification would take weeks. You'd also need board approval for the compensation package it would require to make that even remotely feasible. The silence that followed was heavy. Nolan was beginning to grasp the full scale of what Darla's decision had cost him. Not just my expertise, but the operational foundation his clinic had relied on for nearly 2 decades. I'm so sorry, Eva, he finally said. You deserved better than this. I ended the call as Thomas was already dialing up department leads, expanding our lab's operational hours, and bringing in backup technicians to handle the rising flood of patient orders. We both knew we were about to get very busy. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Everwind's parking lot was buzzing with activity. The news had spread fast throughout Spokane's medical community. Silver Rock's lab was down indefinitely. Physicians were now urgently redirecting tests to whoever could take them, and Everwind was ready. Thomas met me at the front doors, visibly energized. Ava, we've received over 200 lab order transfers since yesterday afternoon. Our phones are still ringing. Walking through the expanded facility, I saw our team already in motion, loading samples, configuring machines, coordinating pickups. Unlike the chaos I'd left behind, this was controlled, focused, and optimistic. Dr. Garland, I heard from across the room. Lisa Tran, one of Everwind's senior lab techs, waved me over with a big smile. We're so honored to have you here. Physicians are already asking for your oversight on their high-priority cases. After months of being dismissed by Darla, the warm welcome was overwhelming. These professionals valued experience. They understood that leadership in laboratory medicine isn't just about checklists, it's about clinical trust. Since sunrise, my phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Messages from physicians, former Silver Rock colleagues, even experienced staff asking if there might be a place for them at Everwind. The exodus had begun. At 9 a.m., Thomas's assistant approached holding a sticky note. Dr. Garland, I have Darla Jensen on line 2. She says it's urgent. Regulatory compliance. Thomas glanced at me, eyebrow raised. Take it, he said with a knowing grin. I picked up the receiver. This is Dr. Garland. Ava, thank God, Darla's voice burst out shaky and strained, a far cry from her smugness just 24 hours earlier. Now her voice sounded different, desperate, and drained. I need your help, Darla pleaded. The federal agencies are saying we can't reopen the lab without a certified director, and every replacement candidate says it'll take 6 to 8 weeks to complete credentialing. That sounds about right, I said evenly. Background checks board, verification agency review, it's all very thorough. We can't survive 8 weeks without revenue, she snapped, panic, overtaking her exhaustion. Doctors are pulling referrals, patients are leaving. We're hemorrhaging accounts by the hour. I'm sorry to hear that, Darla, I replied, but I'm no longer employed by Silver Rock. You'll need to discuss this with Dr. Shepard when he returns. He's flying back early. She rushed out. He'll be here this afternoon and he wants to meet with you. We can offer a raise, more vacation, whatever it takes. I sighed as another stack of laboratory orders came in from former Silver Rock physicians redirected to Everwind. I appreciate the gesture, I said calmly, but I've already committed to Everwind Diagnostics. Even if I wanted to come back, the damage is done. You'd have to restart the entire approval process. So there's no quick fix? She asked, barely audible now. No, I said plainly. The regulations don't allow emergency reinstatements. You eliminated a federally mandated position, and there are consequences for that. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment, sorting through the conflicting emotions. There was undeniable satisfaction in watching Darla finally understand the depth of her mistake. But I also felt real sadness for Dr. Shepard and the good people at Silver Rock now caught in the fallout of her reckless decision. How'd that go? Thomas asked as he stepped in with a fresh coffee and a knowing smile. About what you'd expect, I said. Darla's finally realizing that federal law doesn't care about her budget goals. Well, their disaster has been our best quarter, he said, grinning. And it's only been a day. I turned back to my workstation, beginning quality review for the day's batch. The irony wasn't lost on me. Darla's attempt to save money had instead created a cascade of failure that boosted my career and undermined everything she was trying to protect. 3 days later, Dr. Nolan Shepard returned from Chicago to find Silver Rock Medical Center in total disarray. What he walked into would have been laughable if it hadn't been so damaging. I heard the full story from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a longtime Silver Rock physician who just transferred her cases to Everwind. She called that Thursday afternoon, still stunned by what she'd witnessed. Eva, you should have seen Nolan's face when he walked into the lab, Dr. Jennifer Walsh told me over the phone. The entire diagnostic wing was dark. No testing, no reports, no revenue, nothing. Darla had been standing in the middle of it, all clutching a pile of regulatory violation notices, like they might somehow justify her decision. But the confrontation had been immediate and brutal. Nolan, usually calm and diplomatic, had apparently let months of frustration boil over in front of half the remaining lab staff. "What have you done?" He'd shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile white tile. "Do you even understand what you've destroyed?" According to Jennifer, Darla had attempted to defend herself by citing long-term salary savings. Nolan wasn't having it. "You fired the one person whose credentials kept us operational to save money," he asked, voice cold now. Eva's salary was a bargain for someone generating over $2 million a year in lab revenue. And he was right. My annual compensation may have been $120,000, but the diagnostics department I ran brought in close to 17% of the clinic's entire operating income. Darla had cut the backbone of the business, thinking she was trimming fat. Jennifer said Darla even tried to claim they could hire someone quickly. I shared that part with Thomas later while we reviewed Everwind's soaring quarterly numbers. Nolan apparently laughed, I said. The bitter kind. Told her it would take 2 months minimum to get someone certified. And that's assuming anyone would want to join a clinic that just nuked its own compliance reputation. The domino effect was massive. The lab shutdown triggered a cascade that spread far beyond finances. Years of patient trust dissolved overnight. Referring physicians started moving their entire caseloads to other clinics. Insurance providers began demanding answers about lapses in continuity of care. By the end of October, barely 2 weeks after my departure, Silver Rock was facing potential closure. Nolan had called an emergency board meeting, and word around the medical community was grim. they had two options: either absorb massive federal fines for operating in violation, or shutter the diagnostics wing and lose nearly 20% of their entire revenue stream. Meanwhile, Everwind was thriving. Under my direction, we expanded capacity, onboarded 3 new lab technicians, and established working relationships with a dozen new referring providers. Ava Thomas said during our weekly meeting, the October numbers are in, and they're wild. We've increased lab revenue by 68%. And to think this all started because someone thought experience was too expensive. Month and patient satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, Thomas announced. This is the strongest growth Everwind has ever seen. It felt surreal. After months of Darla's dismissiveness and constant second-guessing, I was now in a place where my experience wasn't just acknowledged, it was respected. The lab team consulted me like a mentor, not an obstacle. Physicians called me directly not to challenge my decisions, but to thank me for helping improve patient outcomes. Meanwhile, Darla had become persona non grata in Spokane's medical community. Word of the regulatory meltdown at Silver Rock spread quickly. Her reputation for cutting corners had tanked any chance of landing another position in serious healthcare administration. From what I'd heard, even the temp agencies were turning her down. Dr. Nolan Shepard officially terminated her just 4 days after his return, but by then, the damage was beyond repair. The part that gave me the most peace wasn't the professional vindication. It was knowing the patients were in better hands now. Everwind's facility was larger, more modern, and equipped with advanced diagnostic platforms Darla had refused to approve at Silver Rock. The physicians who transferred over told me repeatedly that they'd never realized how far behind Silver Rock had fallen until they saw how smoothly things ran here. Darla's short-sighted decision, trying to save a line item on a spreadsheet, had ended up costing Silver Rock more than $3 million in lost revenue. The clinic entered bankruptcy proceedings within 6 months. She never worked in healthcare again. Her name became a cautionary tale in administrator circles across eastern Washington. As for Silver Rock itself, despite Nolan's best efforts, it didn't survive the scandal. Regulatory fines, patient claims, and loss of contracts forced him to sell off the remaining assets to cover liabilities. I still remember the day I reviewed Everwind's year-end reports from my new corner office, sunlight pouring through the Windows charts on the screen showing double-digit growth and patient satisfaction scores higher than we'd ever projected. It all felt strange, poetic, and fully earned. Darla's arrogance had launched my greatest professional chapter. She thought firing me would cut costs. Instead, it cut the cord between Silver Rock and its credibility. All I had to do was step aside and let her ignorance do the rest. In the end, the best revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was simply letting someone fall flat on the sword they sharpened for you. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to thank you, not just for listening, but for seeing the full picture. This wasn't just about a job or even about revenge. It was about dignity, experience, and standing your ground when someone in power treats you like a line item instead of a legacy. So now, I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Have you ever been pushed aside by someone who didn't understand your value? Someone who believed shortcuts and spreadsheets could replace decades of lived knowledge? Drop a comment below. I'd truly love to read your thoughts, your stories, your reflections. They remind me I'm not alone in this, and neither are you. To anyone out there going through something similar, here's what I've learned. Quiet power is real. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't need to retaliate to win. Sometimes all it takes is knowing your worth, walking away with your integrity, and letting the consequences speak for themselves. Because in the end, it's not about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming your place and doing better in the right environment. If this story moved you, or made you think, consider subscribing to the channel. There's more where this came from, more stories of strength, of strategy, of the quiet victories we don't always see. I hope you'll join us. Let's build a space where experience is honored, and where we remind each other that no one is ever truly replaceable when they're the foundation. Thank you again for being here. Your support means more than you know.